Take it away, Dr. Paulus.
Right. Thank you for the introduction, Anu, and for organizing this conference. I've really enjoyed lurking in the background and hearing the various presentations throughout the day following the morning keynote. And I think especially that last presentation is a nice setup for what I want to talk about in this presentation. Because throughout the day, implicitly or explicitly, we've heard a lot about ethical issues that have come up. But even more broadly, trying to think about what is the role of human agency as we're working with more and more automated tools and processes. And so that is the focus I want to take in this talk is how we think about as we automate more and more processes, how do we develop in conjunction with those human practices in order for those processes to be ethical, but also for us to make what are unique human contributions in our collaborations with AI. And so I want to start by very briefly saying something about a particular historical context that we're in, especially in terms of information and technology. And then I want to look back a little bit at the emergence of libraries, why we ended up with them in the first place, as a civilization, and why we invented this particular type of institution and how it's evolved over time along with technology, and how that might help us think about the role of libraries in the present. And then I'll get into focusing on some suggestions about how we might begin to think about designing new information processes alongside human practices. So many of you are probably familiar with the term, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. This was popularized by Klaus Schwab in the World Economic Forum some time ago. And the idea is that for the last few hundred years, we've faced significant technological transformations as a society. And most recently, the last two have really been about automated information processing. We've begun automating more things for a number of decades, and now we are looking at much more powerful autonomous forms of automation. And this is changing how we work and how we relate to each other. If we think about, in my context in higher ed, if we think about how we've adapted to the third industrial revolution, arguably we're still struggling with that. An example of this is this very good book by Janae Cohn on digital reading. And she makes the argument in this book. This book was published in 2020. So this is right before rapid digital transformation that was accelerated during the pandemic, right before kind of the very broad popular interest in AI. But Cohn makes this argument that we really haven't done a good job updating our reading practices and tools given the affordances of digital technologies. We've been very comfortable with a print-based approach to reading and a lot of presumptions about why that's better. And we haven't done a good job engaging with the digital text that actually, most of our content comes in these days anyway. In addition to not really doing a job of thinking about our digital practices and updating those, we haven't done a good job reforming the kinds of text and the kind of text technologies that we have with digital technologies. So if we think about now we're facing the fourth industrial revolution, which really has to do with artificial intelligence, the challenges become even more complex for us. Now, Cohn makes a very important point that we have managed a number of significant media shifts in the past. And she says that constantly a few major issues come up as we're looking at changes in formats. One has to do with memory loss. How will we continue to remember important things from the past? One has to do with how do we discern information amidst all that is out there by proliferating content through new forms. And the third major one that she points to is information overload. It's like how do we keep up? How do we not just be overwhelmed by the amount of content? This is certainly true with digital technologies. This is even more a larger issue with automatically generated content too. The good news, Cohn points out, is that we've actually made some significant adaptations to changes in media based on media shifts over time. We've developed much more sophisticated ways of being reflective about how we do preserve our memories of the past, how we do manage our attention. We've become very sophisticated in terms of thinking about discovery and analysis of content. And we've learned how to incorporate new knowledge into previous knowledge and how to work with that responsibly. So there's hope for the future that as challenging as this shift to AI is, that we have some skills that we can draw from our history, and also just our ability to adapt. A deeper perspective on our particular moment comes from the philosopher Luciano Floridi, who says that the proliferation of and Floridi uses the term information revolution, and this is essentially the third and fourth industrial revolutions, having to do with the automated information and processing of technology. And Floridi's point is that there's something much more fundamental that's happening with these technologies. Intelligent or smart agents no longer have to be human. And this has a big impact on how we think about ourselves and how we think about our role in reality. And so he argues, and I'm summarizing on the second part of the lower part of the screen here, I'm kind of summarizing or paraphrasing his point, is that we need to do a lot more than just update our skills to sort of adapt to the changes with emerging technologies like AI. We really need to update our ethical frameworks, and we need to update the narratives that we have about that shape these ethical frameworks. We need to critique them, and we need to create new ones. So I want to take a step back in history, and I want to think about the emergence of libraries. So if we are going through a current information revolution, arguably we've been through other information revolutions in the past. Perhaps the first was connected with the emergence of our species, when we developed the capacity for reflective attention. Much later on, humans around the world begin to settle into cities and begin to create, complex organizations, institutions to manage activities, to build more of a structural agency than what individuals could do on their own, or small groups of individuals could do on their own. These agencies began creating artifacts, information artifacts to communicate across space and time, but also to be able to augment knowledge over time too. And it's here that we have the emergence of libraries, archives and libraries, the institutions that became focused on how do we manage cultural attention, how do we manage information. And if we think about then what a library is from the beginning, arguably it's very consistent with what a library is now. Libraries began, and they still function with an intention, and the intention is to configure an intellectual order. And this order is represented by information artifacts, and it's for a particular form of agency. In the past, libraries of empires and kingdoms and so forth, it was a pretty narrow kind of agency that the founders of those libraries were concerned about. These days, it's much broader. We support broad ranges of goals and work and groups through our libraries. In addition to that intention, or following from that intention, there's certain activities that libraries do, right? Libraries focus on identifying what's important for its particular community. It collects artifacts that are judged worthy of attention. Historically, these were physical collections, of course. Nowadays, we might think of a collection more as a context for discovery. These are the important things that we point our users to. And then, of course, the library has a role of mediation, of helping people access these information artifacts through various systems, through various spaces, and through various services. I focus on this because the point I want to make is that throughout history and presently, libraries are a combination of material technologies as well as formative techniques, or practices is the term I'm using here. So obviously we have information artifacts that have grown in sort of diversity of formats. We have increasingly complex access systems and dissemination platforms. And the role of instruction has become incredibly important, especially within the last 50 years or so, as we've needed to help our users work within an increasingly complex information environment. And the way that we think about and try to cultivate information agency in others has become a lot more focused on reflective, critical, and responsible use of that information. And this has been going on into our information revolution, including with automation. So libraries, ahead of a lot of other organizations, did the first thing you do with new technologies, you figure out how to do, old things more efficiently. And so automated a lot of technical operations. And then after that, you start moving into the phase where you do new things with new technology. So as libraries begin to build and participate in information networks, they begin to develop automated information exchange mechanisms, online access. By the end of the 20th century, libraries were providing, unmediated access to a lot of digital content. In the 21st century, I think we've seen a lot of maturation around the idea of information literacy and digital literacy, focusing much more on ethics as we begin to understand the systems and how they interface with sort of social structures. And this is now led into this particular interesting moment we're living in, where we are now integrating into library systems newer forms of AI, such as generative AI, looking at new systems that we can provide our users access to facilitate or accelerate research. And we are looking at how information literacy and information ethics intersect with AI literacy and AI ethics. So a key challenge, I think, as we continue to evolve, as we continue to adapt and integrate AI into libraries, has to do with how we go about designing new automated information processes and how we develop in conjunction with those new human information processes. A few slides back, I talked about libraries being material technologies as well as formative techniques. I call them formative because they shape us to interact with information in a particular way. And we need to be thinking about, as we automate, how we automate, but also the impact of that automation on us. Now, I need to define this term practice that I've been using, and I'm using a fairly robust understanding of what a practice is here, and I'm taking this from the virtue ethicist Alasdair MacIntyre. And so for MacIntyre, a practice is a combination of complex skills. So he uses the example of potting a plant versus agriculture. So potting a plant, most people can figure out how to do that and do that. They can master that skill. Agriculture is a much more complex set of skills involving professionals and doing different things to make agriculture happen. So if you take the example of agriculture, that complex set of skills is shaped by both professional as well as social agreements about what activities are worth doing with and for others. So there are certain agreements that define what these skills are. Therefore, those skills are embedded in ethical frameworks or narratives about ultimate goods or desirable goods. Agriculture is good for certain things. Societies have decided. So that means that when you're engaging in this complex practice, that when you're involved in this ethical framework, you're participating in a shared tradition of excellence. And that excellence, that tradition, those virtues, they shape both the practice and the practitioner. So the key point here is that ethics, ethical understandings and agreements, certain excellences or virtues have shaped the kinds of things that we do as professionals, or even more complex work done by non-professionals. Those depend on certain virtues that society has said are important, but our participation in those activities through those skills also shapes us. So when we think about automating something, it's important to think about the virtues associated with those tasks. So in this very wordy slide, what I'm trying to show here is how the skills that are associated with information, finding information, identifying a need, finding information, using information, are associated with certain ethics, and we can call these the practices. So when we are searching for information, we're concerned about the diversity of the sources we're using, the accuracy of the sources we're using, and the appropriate use of the sources. So those skills are tied with ethics. But there's also virtues that have shaped these skills, that shape these ethical concerns, and that also as we participate in these practices, those virtues are formed in us. For the virtues here, I'm pulling from Shannon Valor's virtues list from Technology and the Virtues. And these are the values she says are most important for our particular technological social moment. And I think they very nicely provide an example of the kinds of virtues that are connected with information practices, both practices for us as professionals, but also for users of information. So this framework shows that when we are thinking about information attention, this is about a lot more than focus, right? This is about our true desires. This is about intelligent hope. This is about deep human understanding. As we think about information practices connected with analysis, this is about much more than accuracy. This is about trust, networks of trust. It's about being open to wonder. It's about charity, and it's about our openness to change. As we think about information agency connected with our information practices, this is a lot more important than just legal compliance here. This is about the kinds of relationships that we're engaged with. This is about our contributions to the common good. And ultimately, it's about, hopefully, it's about our care for others. So as we develop more and more automated information processes, because a lot of the things that we do as information professionals or users of information can be automated, and we've seen some really interesting examples just today. These automated information processes certainly need to be developed to be ethical or responsible to the extent that we can. So, for example, like many libraries, we're looking at a number of these newer AI research tools that we want to pilot, we want to sort of add to our tech stack. And as we're doing this, as we're looking at pieces of the research process that can be automated, there's a lot of ethical questions that we're asking. I mean, is the data sources for these systems, is it representative? Is it sufficiently inclusive? Is it accurate data? We're asking about the explainability of the systems. To a certain extent, we needed to have a level of transparency, understand how these systems work. So we understand how they're working with our inputs, and we need to be asking questions about privacy. Are our prompts, our interactions with these tools, is that being fed? Is that being used to train the models or not? And are the outputs reliable? So there's a lot of ethical questions that we can ask of these systems. At the same time, I mean, my argument here is that we also need to be thinking about what are the virtuous human practices that we cultivate alongside our work with these, hopefully ethical, automated systems. What are the things that we are doing that are cultivating or clarifying our cares and our hopes? How are we carefully analyzing the analysis, the automated analysis that's going on, and how do we add a level of charity to that maybe the systems can't? You can't program that. And then how do we think about our responsibilities in terms of the careful use of the outputs that we then take responsibility for and consider the benefits for others. So, I mean, I personally am very optimistic, but even more hopeful about the opportunities we have for integrating AI into our libraries, into our information practices wisely. And I think the libraries have a huge role and responsibility in this, but it does require us to again be very careful in how we are automating work, to be thoughtful of what we're losing when we don't do the work ourselves, And also to be thinking about, well, what are the virtuous things that we do, the virtuous practices that we can design or cultivate alongside this? So we continue to have an important and truly enhanced role for human agency as we work with these tools. Thank you for your time and attention. And at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have.